know these pictures, guys, especially this one right here. The posterior one, I feel like, was the one that tripped you guys up the most. Okay, so when you're knowing posterior pictures, this one's posterior and this one's posterior. You can tell because of the pulmonary what? What are these? Pulmonary
artery, vein.
veins. These are pulmonary veins coming back in. They're red because they're oxygenated. Remember, in the pulmonary circuit, it's the opposite. Okay, so pulmonary circuit, you have the pulmonary veins coming in. Okay, they're drawn red because they're oxygenated. That means it just came from the lungs. Okay, let's go over the axial vessels quickly. By the way, you guys need to know any of these pictures on here are fair game. If I use a different picture that's not in the PowerPoint, it's not going to be like a difficult one. You know, it's going to be one that's very, very similar to these pictures here. I put a lot of pictures where you can practice. So my recommendation is always printing it out in color, putting it in a sheet protector, and then just like with marker, with dry erase marker, writing on top the things, right? You just go through the list, identify, write it on top. Also, you need to be able to find them on the models. So maybe a good idea would be to take pictures of the models before you leave today, so you can have those pictures also and be able to identify the things on the models. Okay, so with the axial vessels, we only have 7 terms. In your list, if you look, a couple of them have asterisks by them. So the asterisk means that you have to know both the artery and the vein for that one. Okay, got it? All right, so first thing we want to notice is the aorta. The aorta comes off of the heart, and then you have the aortic arch, which you guys know. But then all of this is considered the aorta, basically, going down, okay? So when it's in the thoracic cavity, it's considered the thoracic aorta. When it's in the abdominal cavity, it's considered the abdominal aorta. And it stays as the abdominal aorta until it turns into the common iliac arteries. You didn't need to know the difference between ascending and descending, but obviously it's easy to tell. When it's in the thoracic cavity, it's called the thoracic aorta, and then when it's in the abdominal cavity, it's called the abdominal aorta. You're going to have a lot of vessels coming out of the abdominal aorta. The biggest one that I need you to know is the celiac trunk. Okay, celiac trunk is just going to be this one big vessel coming out that splits into 3. Okay.
And all 3 are celiac trunk?
No, all 3 are different things, but you don't need to know what each one is. Okay. If you guys learn what they are, it may be like a good idea. Bonus question. I'll try to include a good amount of bonus.
video works.
Yeah? Okay, good. Alright, so celiac trunk, and also for the video, if you guys learn what the 3 things coming out of the celiac trunk, they're in these slides, so you don't need to like look for them online. Then that would be a good idea to learn. But for the actual practical itself, you don't need to know them, just for maybe a bonus if you want. Okay, so the celiac trunk is coming off of the abdominal aorta. Then these right here are going to be your renal arteries. Okay, so we're looking at arteries first. Here, so here you have your celiac trunk. Okay, you have the vessels that come out. You have your left gastric artery, common hepatic artery, and your splenic artery. Those are the 3 arteries that come out of the celiac trunk. Then coming out here, you have the renal artery, you have the left and right renal arteries, which are the ones that we're talking about here. These arteries split into 2. One becomes the adrenal ones on the tops, and then you have the renal ones on the bottom. You only need to know the renal ones, okay? You need to know both the renal arteries and veins. So if it's red, it's going to be an artery. If it's blue, it's going to be a vein, okay? Here you can see the celiac trunk again. Here they just have them labeled with letters though. Let's see here. You can see the renal arteries. Here you can see them. So here you have the celiac trunk, splits into 3 different arteries, okay? Then you have the renal arteries coming in here in the back. Right, so renal means to the kidneys, Okay, renal is basically the word that you use when you're describing something that involves the kidneys. Then you have the renal veins, which they run basically, what is the word when two things are running like this? Parallel, there we go. They run parallel to the veins, okay? If you can identify the veins, you can identify the arteries easily. Then you have your gonadal arteries and veins. Now gonadal has to do with gonads, and then gonads is what you use to describe your sex organs. So for females, it would be basically arteries and veins that go to the uterus, and then for males, it would be arteries and veins that go to the testes. Okay, so here you have the gonadal ones, and here once we get into which we're going to start already at the end of next week, the reproductive system. When we talk about reproductive organs, most of them start off as abdominal organs. So during development, they're not like outside, especially like for males, but they're all abdominal organs. So they're like inside of the abdomen. So you can kind of see a trace of that by the fact that the gonadal artery is so high up here, right? And then that tube, here you can see the gonadal artery and gonadal vein that will go down into the sex organs, okay? So just understand what's going on here in the abdominal aorta. You have your celiac trunk, the renal arteries and veins, the gonadal arteries and veins, and then finally it splits in two here at the common iliac artery and common iliac veins, okay? Iliac, what does that sound like?
Iliac fossa.
Yeah, iliac fossa, which has to do with the ilium,
Iliac,
exactly, right?
iliac.
And if you see here, this is your ilium, right? This is that big bone, the ilium. So at the ilium, it's gonna split into two because that's when it starts going into your legs. It splits into two, okay? After the common iliac artery and common iliac vein, it's gonna split into further things, but you don't need to know those further things just yet, okay? So know thoracic aorta, abdominal aorta, celiac trunk, renal artery and vein, gonadal artery and vein, common iliac artery and vein, and also know your hepatic veins. What are hepatic veins? What does hepatic mean? Renal means kidneys, gonadal means sex organs, and what does hepatic mean? Hepatic what? Could it be stomach maybe? Stomach would be gastric. Think of another organ that is in your abdomen area. So the lungs would be in the thoracic region, so it would be there. What?
Liver.
Liver. There we go. Good. So liver would be hepatic. So here, basically this is your liver. I just need you to know that the veins that are coming from your liver, those are called the hepatic veins. Okay, so here you can see the hepatic vein is going into this right here. And what would this be right here? This big vein going up. Yes, inferior vena cava.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so you can see
that's huge.
this is basically the inferior vena cava. We don't call it the aorta. This is the inferior vena cava that's going up towards the heart. Okay, so everything emptying into this big vein going up here, that's the inferior vena cava. So this right here, inferior vena cava, renal veins, correct? Here you can see the aorta
That's the whole thing.
very well. This is all aorta, right? So this is all going to be oxygenated. You have the arch, it goes down through the thoracic, then it becomes abdominal. At the abdominal, you have the celiac trunk, renal arteries, gonadal arteries, right here, these two coming off of the side, gonadal arteries. Okay, you don't need to know superior mesenteric or any of that. Just know that the gonadal ones are going to be like the skinny ones coming off of the sides. Then it breaks into the common iliac arteries. Okay.
So which
and
one is the aorta and which one is the inferior vena
the red one is the aorta and the blue one's the vena cava.
cava? Oh,
Yeah, we color them red and blue because
Oh, cause like you said it was like the inferior vena cava was like red, blue.
Blue, yeah.
And it's red on the other. Seriously?
No, so this here only shows you oxygenated. So this only shows you arteries.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah. But this one shows you both. This one shows you both. Here you can see how the gonadal ones will go down. I can't even see what I'm looking at here. The gonadal ones will go down. You can see from here all the way down into the testes. And if we're distinguishing between male and female, then that one would just be the, I think it's called testicular vessels. So it would be the testicular arteries and the testicular veins.
Wait, so what is also happening?
Yeah, they're just called differently. So like if we're just talking about either or, like it could be either, then we call them the gonadal ones. Okay. All right, good. Next, so we went through all the axial ones. Let's go quickly through the appendicular ones. Here you have a couple also that are both artery and veins. Main ones are going to be the axillary one. Now the axillary one is coming off of one called the right subclavian. If you guys remember, the right subclavian is going to come, well actually no. The right subclavian is coming off of the brachiocephalic artery, which is, if you guys remember, when you,
Go on to the right.
yeah, when here, this one that's coming off of here like this. Yeah, so here, the brachiocephalic artery that comes off of the aortic arch is going to split into the right common carotid and the right subclavian. That right subclavian is going to go to the arm. This is going to go to the head. Here, this is going to the head, the left subclavian going to the arm. And we can see the product of that when we get here. So this, your heart would be here, then you have the brachiocephalic that splits in two. One goes common carotid, the other one goes here, the right subclavian, and it gets a little big there. Okay, so that right subclavian is going to become the axillary artery once it gets in your axilla, okay, in your armpit basically. Okay, you don't need to know right subclavian, but you do need to know axillary. Okay, so you need to know the axillary artery and vein. They run exactly in the same place. So if you look right here, let me see if I can find it. Here, this would be your axillary vein. Okay, subclavian vein, axillary vein. Okay, same thing here with
They look the same.
yeah, they're exactly the same basically. You can see them like side by side. Subclavian to axial, subclavian to axial. The only thing here is that you have one that branches like through your armpit and then becomes over here something else, okay, that you do need to know also. Then you have, we're going to go through the arteries first in the arm. You need to know your brachial artery, which is the one that will run just like right down your humerus, okay? That's the one that that we feel when we're taking blood pressure up at the appendicular vessels. We said that the brachiocephalic artery then splits up into the common carotid and the right subclavian, which is what we see right here. So if your heart is right here, your aortic arch would kind of go like this, and then you have the brachiocephalic little artery coming off the top of the aortic arch, would then break up into these two, into one that would go up to the neck, and then this one that would go right subclavian, and then become the axillary artery right at the point where it's like at your armpit, okay? Remember that all arteries are going to be deep, so that will be your axillary artery, that then becomes your brachial artery, and your brachial artery is the one that we try to listen to, right, when we're doing the blood pressure, and the one that we hold when we do that little trick with our hand. And then that brachial artery will split up into the radial artery and the ulnar artery. Okay, so remember that the radial artery will run parallel to your radius, and then your ulnar artery will run parallel to your ulna. The radial artery is going to run kind of towards where your thumb is, right? Because that's what your radius is connected to on that side. And then your ulnar artery will run where basically towards your pinky, right? And then there's this loop, and then they'll kind of just extend into the digits, into the capillaries. So you can see here side by side, you have your arteries, and then you have your veins here as well. They kind of mirror each other, except for minor differences. Let's start with the top here in your cephalic vein. So the axillary vein you need to know. And then once you get here, a big difference between the arteries and the veins is that after the subclavian, you have a split, right? And then it'll split with the cephalic and the axillary. Okay, so you need to know the axillary, but you also need to know the cephalic, which runs a little bit more laterally, kind of like on your humerus. Now they'll both go down, and you'll have your cephalic vein, but you'll also have your basilic vein that you need to know. And the difference between the two is that your cephalic vein runs laterally and your basilic vein runs medially, okay? So if you can tell the difference between those two, you'll be fine. You do not need to know the brachial vein, just because sometimes in images, they won't include all three of these together, so it's kind of confusing. So basically, if you have one that's medial, just assume it's the basilic, and if you have one that's lateral, assume it's the cephalic. Not really the most accurate thing to do, but it'll help out, because you can obviously see by the color code that you have on this slide that one is deep and the other one is more superficial. So your brachial is going to be actually a lot deeper than your basilic one. But anyways, then I want you guys to notice this median cubital vein. This median cubital vein is going to come off of the basilic, and it's going to kind of run like across the middle of your forearm. Okay, so if you can see that median cubital vein, that's the one I believe that we see when we extend our arm, that vein that you normally get blood taken out of. You can see that it's very superficial. It runs kind of just right there where your elbow bends. So know that median cubital vein, okay? And yeah, that's it for the veins of the arm. Make sure that you review them in all of these slides. In these slides here. Know also this middle figure right there where they run side by side, that you can see the arteries and the veins together. And let's move on to the appendicular vessels in the lower body. So two that you need to know both of are the femoral and the popliteal. I don't know, that's said a couple of different ways. So let's move in here. You can see the femoral artery basically is just going to run down where the femur will run down, and the femoral vein is going to run there as well. Do not confuse your femoral vein with your great saphenous vein, okay? If they have a figure here normally, I believe here it's inverted. Your great saphenous vein is probably going to be a little bit more superficial. Your great saphenous vein will run through the inside of your thigh, basically, okay? So just kind of through the inside of your thigh all the way down, all the way down. It's called great saphenous vein because it's really big, really long. That goes all the way down to kind of like where your feet are. Okay, so know the great saphenous vein. That's another one that you need to know. But definitely know your femoral artery and vein, and then also know your popliteal artery and vein. Now the popliteal is a little bit different because the popliteal actually runs posterior. So if you can see here, you can see that this is an anterior view of your leg, and this is a posterior view of your leg. This is the back of your knee. The popliteal artery will run through the back of your knee, as will your popliteal vein. Okay? So if you see an artery or a vein running straight down your leg. In the posterior view, it's gonna be your popliteal, okay? Basically right in the back of your knee, okay? So you can actually probably even try to like feel a pulse through there if you really stick your arm through there. Stick your fingers in the back of your knee, you can probably even feel a pulse through your popliteal. Okay, obviously your muscle will have to be relaxed. So know both the artery and the vein for that, know the great saphenous vein, and then let's move on to the lower part of the leg where it's just arteries that you need to know. So no veins in the bottom of the leg, just arteries. Here you have your anterior tibial artery that you need to know, and you also need to know the posterior tibial artery. Those are easy to tell because they both run through basically right next to the tibia. One is going to run anteriorly by the tibia, and the other one's going to run posteriorly on the tibia. Okay, the tibia is that big bone that you have in your leg. You have the tibia, and the last thing we said was about the anterior and posterior tibial artery. You have one in the front, which is the anterior one. Basically, if it's running down the tibia on your practical, it's going to be one of these two, so you just need to be able to identify if it's the anterior tibial or if it's the posterior tibial. Anterior tibial is going to be on the front, posterior tibial is going to be on the back. And then the last artery that you need to know is going to be your dorsalis pedis. And that's just basically going to kind of tell you what it is by itself, right? Dorsalis will mean dorsal, so it's going to be on the top. And then pedis is foot, so on the top of your foot, basically that artery that runs on the top of your foot is going to be the dorsalis pedis that you need to know. So study these slides as well. Know here you have both of them together, even some of the abdominal aortic structures. You have all of the arteries that you need to know already on this image. And then here in the next slide, I have all of the vein stuff that you need to know. So obviously, make sure you know the difference between your femoral vein and your great saphenous vein. Those are going to be the two biggest ones that are probably going to get confused. Okay? Know the difference between both of those, and then obviously the popliteal one is in the back of the knee. If you can remember that, then you'll be fine. And then know this structure as well. Try your best to identify all of them here on the body. There's a lot that I think all of the ones that we're covering, all the veins that we're covering in the appendicular division are going to be on there. Okay, so that's it for the instruction. Basically, the rest of this is just slides for you to practice. Okay, there's a lot of slides for you to practice. It'll help you out a lot if you can just take like we said before, take a sheet protector and then just start labeling if you can. There's some numbers here. You don't need to know all of these, but I didn't have time to go through all of them. So if you can memorize the vast majority of them, you'll be fine. For the most part, I think they're ones that you need to know, except for these here in the head. But as I see here, they're all pretty much ones that you should know. Not these little ones inside here. And then here you have the veins. These are already, they have the answers there. So maybe you can just black them out and then try to write the answer on top. And then afterwards, if you're using dry erase marker, then you can just erase that line that you put on whatever you blacked out, and then you can see if it was what you thought it was or not. Okay, that's the end of the slide. Now you will need to know how to label the things on the models that we have, and I'll just go ahead and I'll take the video. So these are the two models that we're going to be using. This person, right? So Frederica, you will need to know here you can see the common iliac, right? Here's where it would split into different things. You can see the abdominal aorta that's running through here. I believe here would be where your celiac trunk would start. And then just different arteries going through there. You can see the veins that are going through there as well. Okay, so you will need to know that. Here at the top, definitely This would be the subclavian. You don't need to know that. Maybe it's not on your list, but it would be a good idea to learn, just in case I give you a bonus. Here's your heart also. Remember all the heart structures, the coronary arteries and veins that we had in the list before. Know how to label them on this heart. I may even be able to take this out and you can see the different arteries and veins. Here you have your sinus. So definitely know this. Here's another view of your aorta, right? The descending thoracic aorta, so I may label that as well. And then obviously your heart. Know all the parts of the heart. Know them inside and out, with and without these lids. So I'll just kind of try to take a video so you guys can maybe pause the video and identify different things that you see. If I take this out, definitely know what that artery there is. Know what sinus I'm in. If you zoom out, sorry, not what sinus, what chamber I'm in. And yeah, basically just know this model well. And that's it. If you can identify all of those things, then you'll be good for the practical.